Most of us are aware that the telecom industry, as we know it today in Nigeria, started almost 25 years ago, and I think has witnessed a significant and impactful growth with regards to helping Nigeria's broader commercial ecosystem. I think over the last 25 years, one would argue that it's become a mature market, and there's a lot more stability. If you recall, in the early years, there were quite a few players, quite a few things that started and stopped in terms of the people who entered. But now there's a bit more stability. And I think that the likes of nTEL and NITEL have shown long-term commitment to the industry and Glo, and continue to make a positive impact in terms of its contribution to our GDP as a country. I think some of it is already happening. The Honourable Minister of Communications and Digital Economy has played a role in creating a bit more economic capacity with the tariff relief that happened late last year and early 2025. That's given a bit more justification for the investment in the industry. I think in addition to that, there probably needs to be a bit more synergy between the communications ecosystem and the financial sector. I think you'll find that a lot of telecom companies recognize the inherent value in supporting financial services. And so to the extent possible that there's a bit more of a closer working relationship between both ecosystems to birth what I think is going to be the next chapter that can help define the broader ecosystem in the next 25 years. That telcos have to be able to play more than just a communication or connectivity role, and become a digital platform that can enable and unlock a lot of additional opportunities. You know the challenges as well as I do, some of which are being solved with the regular interventions. Critical National Infrastructure Bill that was passed last year and has been, I think, enforced in terms of protecting all telecommunication assets to make sure that you minimize incidents of vandalism, theft, and just general civil unrest when it comes to those assets. I think in addition to that, there are probably other things that one needs to evaluate. Dynamic pricing and allowing a bit more flexibility in the tariff regime might be one. I think in addition to it, there are tax incentives that, again, I think the government has played a role in creating some reduction in tax, base taxes around withholding tax. A little bit more can be done there. I think there are also areas of opportunity, looking at sustainability and more green energy solutions. And then I do think the federal government has taken a bold step in putting its own stick in the ground with regards to rural connectivity with the 7,000 towers that the federal government wants to deploy in the next 5 years, as well as the 90,000 kilometer fiber project that, again, is also being spearheaded by the federal government of Nigeria. I think those, while they're not necessarily policy interventions, I think that they're welcome interventions that will help. We at nTEL will play our role, not only by supporting the ecosystem, but also creating a couple of interesting products that we think will also further broaden and deepen connectivity and improve telecommunication services across the country. A lot of times regulation comes on the back of innovation. So a lot of times you've got to innovate first, and people test boundaries as long as, especially where there's ambiguity as to what a particular innovation allows or isn't allowed to do. So I think the government should continue to allow for innovation first and then regulate on the back end, because you can't regulate everything. I think when you over-regulate, you stifle innovation. So I think you start by allowing innovation to happen. And as long as you keep your pulse on what's going on, I think you'll find that there are actually opportunities. And we've seen that in areas of cryptocurrency, not just in Nigeria, globally. A lot of people were very skeptical, but they allowed the innovation to happen and they stepped in at the right time and then curtailed some of the excesses as time goes by. So I think, to the extent that the government can play a monitoring role rather than kind of prescribing or proscribing every single form of innovation. I think that's one thing that can help. Nigeria is, one of the world's 6 or 7 largest populations. 1 in 5 Black people is Nigerian. I think the innovation in the telco space is about much more than connectivity, right? So there's opportunities for harnessing what has happened in what I would just call basic commercial or commerce into places like healthcare, education, and logistics. And I think to the extent that one can harness it, it can also provide a lot of learnings for the rest of the world. It can also help with even areas of security. I mean, as simple as that is. I think all of those innovations, first and foremost, have an immediate effect on the economies of the business, right? So it's allowing for more infrastructure sharing and cost sharing, which should ultimately reduce the cost to serve, and hopefully some of those savings get passed on to the end users. I think in addition to that, they lay the foundation where additional returns can be deployed into emerging technologies, AI, machine learning. More importantly, I think it now begins to unlock the opportunities that this industry has to make an impact in alternative or ancillary industries, healthcare, education, even logistics. I think are opportunities that can be explored as the ecosystem becomes broader and more mature. Look, the sustainability of the industry is predicated on the ability to localize as much as possible. In the early days, it was understandable that a lot of our capacity was built from outside of the country. But over time, like I said, in the 25-year industry, there's now opportunities to start to localize those things. I think if you think about what's happening right now with regards to power, with regards to infrastructure, and I think with regards to people who are willing to take intelligent bets on local content and capacity building, I think there's opportunities there. Again, this is an industry that's matured over the last 25 years. If you look at the pioneers, if you will, in terms of boots on the ground, you had a lot more expatriates community that was helping to build the ecosystem. Over time, that's evolved and you see a lot more local capacity building. I think the next phase of that is not just in terms of people, but in terms of technology and in terms of assets that are built. At some point we were looking at a lot more local device manufacturing. I think that's still an opportunity that needs to be stretched. I think in terms of the backbone of the industry, there's a lot of opportunity to further localize content and delivery. I think opportunities like the 3MTT by, again, the Federal Ministry of Communications and Digital Economy is about that. It's about trying to create a more sustainable industry that doesn't rely as much on external influences. External influences can be expensive and sometimes not necessarily committed to the long-term growth of the industry. So I do think it's headed in the right direction. The policies have to just continue to support it without, again, not trying to this battle between how do you marry innovation versus regulation, right? It's one thing for the government to just come and say, you know what, we can't have more than 10% foreign content. I don't think that's necessarily what needs to happen. I think each aspect of the value chain can be evaluated, and where there's a need based on innovation, the government can come and say, you know what, this particular industry is mature enough, or this particular sector in the industry is mature enough that you can then impose some kind of regulation that says you don't need to be bringing civil engineers from wherever in the world, and you can start to protect a bit more over the long term. I think the whole ecosystem itself will benefit from the drive that's already ongoing. I think evaluating tariffs, evaluating the opportunities for this industry to anchor and support ancillary industries. So investors are savvy and they're unemotional about their investments. Wherever they see long-term value, they will deploy capital. I think in this particular case, you're seeing some of that. The tax reform, ability to generate or to expropriate your capital upon the exit of your investments is helping. FX stability is also another critical aspect. But over and beyond that, I think additional things that can be explored is evaluating what the value this industry brings and making sure that it's not under undermined in sort of its return. So if there are ways in which it's unlocking value in other places as well, there should be some incentives. I think you could even look at additional tax incentives, especially when it's long-term. You can tie it to long-term targets so that people aren't just in and out. So I think investors are savvy and unemotional about where their investments go. Ultimately, investors want to be able to put their capital in a place that they're reasonably assured of their ability to take it out. I do think the federal government has made a lot of strides in creating a more positive environment. The ability to repatriate funds upon completion of an investment is helpful. FX stability, and some tax incentives. I think the government could go a bit further in protecting long-term investments and actually tying targets, financial targets, or long-term investments to additional incentives. I think the government could explore a bit more of sharing, a more friendly sharing formula when it comes to the benefits that this industry brings to other industries, financial services, education, and the like. And ultimately, I think as long as we head in this direction, I think there'll be additional investments. There are already lots of additional. I think over the last couple of years, there's probably more interest in the Nigerian telco ecosystem than there was in the 10 years before. nTEL, as many might know, was the legacy carrier, NITEL, that transformed into its current form, nTEL, in 2015, vis-a-vis the privatization, and made a decent run at penetrating the telco space over the last 8-9 years, and a couple of years ago did have to pause. In coming back, we're exploring a very, very light digital play. I'm not at liberty to share everything at this point in time, but our view is that there is still a role to be played by the likes of ourselves to innovate, to create very niche products that meets the needs of a teeming and young population, and that we think there are other tie-ins that are value added, and that ultimately by the time we create the bundle of products and services, that it will excite and incentivize Nigerians to give us a try. Innovation. We think that there's a lot of innovation that's yet to happen in this space. I mean, with all due respect to our partners and our competitors in the ecosystem, we don't think there's been nearly enough innovation in the last few years. We think around financial services, around value-added services, more broadly speaking, that there's opportunities to pick up niches along the lines. For us to go and play in the 100 million subscriber game, that's not what we're about. We're about to find a very small subset of subscribers and serve them extremely well. And we think, the future will kind of take care of itself if we're able to do that very well. Nigeria is a young population. I don't think anybody needs to tell us that. Between 3 and 4 million Nigerians turn 18 every year. And we think that's an opportunity where there's, there aren't as many incumbents in their minds. And that if we're able to tap into that, we can deepen our penetration. We can offer services that we think speak to their needs specifically and ultimately grow with them. So it is kind of where we want to play, undoubtedly. Our focus is really on taking advantage of new and emerging population in the ecosystem. Having been a legacy company, it has a lot of institutional and emotional attachments, if you will. And we think that we owe it to ourselves to give it another shot, an opportunity to implant itself into the hearts and minds of Nigerians by creating what we think are quite important but overlooked sectors and segments of the industry. And that our legacy is that we, in 10, 15, 20 years, or 25 years, we're able to say that we've been able to provide services that have truly differentiated ourselves in the marketplace, but also made an impact. So, I mean, if I look at it through two different lenses, we think there are two aspects of the business that can continue to serve the telco ecosystem. nTEL has quite a bit of infrastructure, legacy infrastructure that we think can be leveraged and shared in the industry. But more importantly, I think in terms of legacy is the ability to play in the digital space. We think that there's some opportunities for us to contribute, make not just a direct impact in the lives of our subscribers, but also generate additional interest, generate additional innovation in the broader ecosystem. We think that in 10, 15, 20, maybe even 25 years, we'll be able to say we have millions of subscribers that have benefited and have used our service system to improve their own lives and their own lot. And that we've also played a role in being a partner to the rest of the ecosystem, supporting everybody else to make sure that that industry continues to be sustainable. So I think the first thing is a fair playing ground for all players. The ecosystem has to be able to see that there aren't any preferential treatments being handed out to different players. We have players that are quite dominant, and there's nothing wrong with how they've gotten there, but to give an opportunity to income or to new entrants to be able to support. I think the market is big enough to sustain, a multiplicity of players, and we hope to be able to play in that role. So I think the free market environment, as well as the continued liberalization of the economy, are two of the major things I would suggest that the government continues to do.